Commission, come to order, please.
Mr. Patron, Mr. Glacier, Mr. Shuffletti, and Mr. Martin, please.
You swear the testimony you'll give before the commission will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do. Will be seated and give your names and your present employment, what your jobs are.
Mr. Chairman, I'm Rockwell Patron, President of the Space Transportation Systems Division of Rockwell International, located in Downey, California. I've been employed by Rockwell for 5 years. I've been in my current position for the last 2 years, and in the prior 3 with Rockwell, I held senior management positions in the Space Shuttle program, for which Rockwell is responsible. Prior to joining Rockwell, I served with NASA from 1960 to 1975. My division is responsible for the design, testing, certification, and manufacture of the Space Shuttle orbiter, and we provide operational support to the delivered orbiters to NASA. The division is also responsible for integration support and for cargo integration into the Space Shuttle system.
Thank you.
I'm Al Martin. I've been with Rockwell 33 years. My present position is I am the site director for Rockwell, located at the Kennedy Space Center, and our organization provides technical advisory support to NASA, also logistics support and configuration management support. I've worked on the shuttle program for 13 years. I've been at the Kennedy Space Center 4 years, and prior to that I was the chief program engineer for orbiter development at our plant in Downey, California. I also worked on the Apollo program for 10 years, and one of my assignments there was launch director of launch operations for Rockwell for the Saturn S2 stage at the Kennedy Space Center.
I'm Robert M. Glacier. I'm Vice President, Program Manager, Orbit Operations Support for the Space Transportation System Division, Rockwell International, based in Downey, California. Joined Rockwell 13 years ago. I have worked on the orbiter project for that entire time in various management capacities. I have been in my present capacity for approximately 2 years. My responsibilities as Program Manager is to provide operations support direction to delivered orbiters, and also to provide logistics support activities in support of delivered orbiters.
I'm Martin Shuffletti. I've been with Rockwell 20 years, approximately 13 years on the Space Shuttle program. I am Vice President of System Integration and Cargo Integration, and the responsibilities there are to provide systems engineering support to the Level 2 program office at the Johnson Space Flight Center for both integration and cargo.
Mr. Patron, you and I had a brief discussion on the telephone about the Rockwell participation in the events leading to the launch on January 28th. Commission would like to have you, in any order you care to, explain the participation of you 4 gentlemen in that process with particular reference to the weather, who was at the meeting, what was said, because as we understand it, there was concern on your part as to whether. We'd like to know exactly what was said, how that concern was expressed, and to whom.
I had been at the Cape since Friday, and then Monday afternoon, after the scrub on that morning, I returned to Downey. I left at the Cape my 2 program managers, you've heard from Bob Glacier and Marty Shuffletti, and told them I would be in our mission support room in Downey for the launch schedule for the next morning. Al Martin is our site director and is normally stationed at the Cape, whereas the two gentlemen here traveled with me for this particular launch and supported. I first heard about an ice concern about 4 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. I had gotten up to go into the support room to support this launch. We have people monitoring consoles throughout the count, and I made a check-in, and they told me there was an ice concern. I told them when I arrived at about 4:30, 4:40, I was informed we were working the problem with our aerodynamicists and debris people, but very importantly, we would have to make an input to Kennedy for a meeting scheduled 6 o'clock our time and 9 o'clock Florida time. We had approximately an hour of work to bring together, and that work had been underway when I arrived, and it was continuing. At that time, I got on the phone with my two program managers just to discuss background, where we were, how things stood, and what the concerns were locally. They described what they knew in Florida. We also in Downey get television input, and we could see some of the ice scenes that were shown here this morning. We arrived through a series of meetings to a top-level discussion in approximately 5:30 Pacific Standard Time, from which we drew the following conclusions. Ice on the mobile launcher itself that could be falling would be debris. We were very concerned with debris of any kind at the time of launch. With this particular ice, one, could it hit the orbiter? There was wind blowing from the west. That appeared not to be so, that it wouldn't hit the orbiter, but it would land on a mobile launcher. The second concern was what happens to that ice at the time you light your liquid fuel engines, the SSMEs, and would it throw it around and ricochet and potentially hit the orbiter? The third aspect was the one that's been discussed here of aspiration. What will happen when the large SRM motors ignite and in effect suck in the air, or referred to as aspiration, and ice addition would come down? How much unknown? The prime thing we were concerned with was the unknown baseline. We had not launched in conditions of that nature, and we just felt we had an unknown as to specifically what trajectory the ice might fly. One can make estimates, but we felt it was an unknown condition. I then called my two program managers who were in Florida at 5:45, and I said, we cannot recommend launching from here. From what we see, we think the tiles would be endangered. We had a very short conversation because they had a meeting to go to. I said, let's make sure we have been asked to understand that we, Rockwell, feel it's not safe to launch. And that was the end of my conversation. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to my program manager and my site manager.
Go ahead.
Let me pick up. I was also alerted to the ice problem about 4 a.m., but this is Eastern Standard Time, received a call from the base explaining the condition that ice was on the fixed service structure. I then made sure that the necessary wheels were in motion to get the proper people in Downey brought in so that they could evaluate the ice. That was also done through Mr. Sciafaletti. I then called about 6 a.m., verified that what was happening, was informed that there was a meeting going on the subject. I got to the base myself at about 7:45 Eastern Standard Time, then discussed with our chief engineer, vice president of engineering, our position, and as Dr. Petrone mentioned, with him, and developed a position that Rockwell would take at the 9 o'clock meeting that was scheduled. At the 9 o'clock meeting, the ice debris team presented their report of the status of the ice. Following that, various people were asked their recommendations and their positions. When I was asked Rockwell's position, I reiterated that there were 3 major unknowns in evaluation of the ice. As Dr. Petrone indicated, the first event was aspiration effects. The second was ice that would ricochet from the fixed service structure and head toward the vehicle. And the third category of unknown ice was ice that was resting on the mobile launcher platform at engine ignition. The fourth category of ice, which was ice in the trough, had already been discussed and resolved once the debris team had removed that ice. Those three categories of ice that I mentioned, however, we have no database on which to base judgments of that. This is the first time it has occurred. It is not a design condition for the orbiter. We therefore felt that since we were in an unknown condition and were unable through any analytical techniques to predict where the ice would go or the degree of damage that would result should that ice strike the orbiter TPS, I then gave the following recommendation to NASA, in which I said that Rockwell could not assure the safety of flight. Or let me give you a better quote, if you would. Yes, my exact quote was, and it comes in two parts. The first one was Rockwell cannot 100% assure that it is safe to fly, which I quickly changed to Rockwell cannot assure that it is safe to fly. We then had a discussion about what that meant and the database that we didn't have in effect. They then moved on to Mr. L. Martin and asked for a position or an opinion from him. So let me ask Al then to pick up there.
In the 9 o'clock meeting, Bob Glazier was our spokesman, but I was asked also if I had anything to add. And statements that I made in the meeting were that I made a statement like it's already been said, meaning that Bob Glazier had stated the Rockwell position. I also added that we did not have a database from which to draw any conclusions for this particular situation with the icicles on the tower. And also we had no real analytical techniques to predict where the icicles might go at liftoff. The other thing that I did was review the fact that prior to each launch, there is great care taken to make sure that there is no debris out on the launch pad. A day or two before launch, a crew goes out and they walk down the entire tower, walk down the mobile launcher surface, and also the concrete apron around the launch pad for the purpose of removing any debris, such as nuts, bolts, rocks, or anything that might be there. And I drew the corollary that the icicles, in this case, could very well become debris, that they might become dislodged from the tower when the SSMEs ignite a few seconds before liftoff, and they could impact on the mobile launcher surface and then become debris when the solid rocket motors lifted off. And we had no way of predicting that. So I was drawing a corollary between the care that's normally taken for debris and painting a picture that the icicles appeared to me to be in that same category. So those were our only comments in that meeting.
Similarly, I was called in and told about the problem, came into the 6 o'clock meeting, which you heard about a few moments ago. And at the conclusion of that meeting, I spoke with Mr. Dick Coors, the Deputy Program Manager from Johnson Space Flight Center, and he asked if we could get the Downey folks turned on to look at the falling ice and how it might traverse toward the vehicle, and also did we have any information on aspiration effects. So I did call back to Downey and got the John Peller folks working on that problem, and they did, as you saw from Charlie Stevenson's sketches, predict that the ice would travel only about halfway to the vehicle, free-falling ice carried by the winds. So we felt that ice was not a problem. However, it would land on the mobile launch platform. That we considered a problem. We also investigated the aspiration database we had, and we had seen the aspiration effect on previous launches where things were pulled into the SRB hole after ignition, but we had never seen anything out as far as the fixed service tower. So we felt, in fact, it was an unknown. We did not have a database to operate from on aspiration effects. At the 9 o'clock meeting, I was asked by Arnie Aldrich, program manager, to give him the results of our analysis, and I essentially told him what I just told you and felt that we did not have a sufficient database to absolutely assure that nothing would strike the vehicle, so we could not lend our 100% credence, if you will, to the fact that it was safe to fly.
When Mr. Patron made his statement, he didn't use the words 100% sure. I suppose nothing is 100% sure.
I didn't use those words either. I'm sorry, sir.
But you just said you did.
I paraphrased that, and I shouldn't have done
Why don't you testify what you said, please?
I said I could not predict the trajectory that the ice on a mobile launch platform would take at SRB ignition.
And
that was the end of it.
but I think NASA's position probably would be was that they thought that you were satisfied with the launch. Did you convey to them in a way that they were able to understand that you were not approving the launch from your standpoint?
I felt that by telling them we did not have a sufficient database and could not analyze the trajectory of the ice, I felt he understood that Rockwell was not giving a positive indication that we were for the launch.
Mr. Glazier, did you think that you made it clear that you felt there was a safety aspect and that you were not approving the launch?
Yes, we actually discussed our position, and I stated more than once during the meeting Rockwell's position that we could not assure that it was safe to fly. It was stated when I first was asked to give our position, and it was also my last statement at that meeting as the meeting wound up. I also reiterated the statement several times through the meeting. So we felt that we had communicated Rockwell's position, that we felt it was unsafe to fly.
Had Rockwell ever taken that position before on previous launches? When the launch had occurred?
No, this is the first time where we've been in a position where we really had no database from which to make a judgment. And this is the first time that Rockwell has taken a unsafe to fly position.
Dr. Patron, you've got a lot more experience than I have in this business, but the few launch conferences I've been on, the question is very simple. Are you go or are you no-go for launch? And maybe isn't an answer. I hear all kinds of qualifications and cautions and considerations here. Did someone ask you, are you go or no-go? That's not asked?
At this particular meeting, as far as I was not in Florida, so I cannot ask that. It has been done at earlier meetings. This was a technical evaluation of a series of problems. We talked about mainly debris hitting the TPS and the tiles. And the long series of reviews that we had done that morning and all led us to a conclusion that we're not safe to fly. And we transmitted that to my two program managers, along with a technical evaluation quickly of why we had arrived at that. I guess so much of it is how the question gets phrased. We had heard earlier we had to work aspiration, work ricochet, work a number of things, which we did, and then we came up with our recommendation.
And your recommendation now, you say, was it was unsafe to fly.
Correct, sir.
Commissioner, do you have any questions? Okay. Thank you very much, gentlemen. You might wait for a minute. We'll take a short recess, 10-minute recess. Mr. Patron, just a couple of questions. One, did you or any of your associates, as far as you know, make any phone calls after the discussions that were referred to just before the recess?
I received a phone call from my program manager back to me. I had no talks with NASA that morning. I was transmitting it through my officially designated representative, my two program managers.
But as far as you know, did they have any further conversations with the NASA people after the one that was testified to?
There was one conversation that went on, I guess, while the meeting was going on. The meeting had started apparently, but had not ended, where my chief engineer received a phone call in Downey from a NASA counterpart in engineering.
And what was your man's name?
John Peller.
John Peller. And you know the substance of that conversation?
Really not. I could only hear just a little part of it. The substance from later discussion, I did not participate in that particular phone call. I just could hear a little bit of, I say, on one side.
Well, without getting into the specifics, just generally speaking, what was the type of the conversation?
Mr. Peller is here today.
Oh, it is?
And if you
Okay,
care
well,
to have that, it'd be better, far better for him to talk, so.
Yes. Well, we'll have him wait here then. I think Mr. Aldridge asked to be have the opportunity to testify next. Do you have any other questions from this?
Can you, were you, are your program managers informed of the activities that were going on at the Cape during the interruptions to the count and the resumptions of the count?
My two program managers were at the Cape, so, yes. And
you were informed, I assume, of the resumption of the count?
yes. After the meeting, I received a phone call from Bob Glazier, who sat here this morning, and then followed by another phone call within a few minutes from Al Martin, in which he told me he had made his input at the meeting, the so-called, I believe called the 9 o'clock meeting, and told me that it looked like NASA was going to go ahead, and we knew that within a few minutes as the loading of the crew proceeded.
Clearly, when they resumed the count, you knew that your recommendation essentially had been either considered and overruled or dispositioned in some way.
That's right, sir.
And subsequent to that point in time, were there any other, did you take any other opportunities to, through yourself or your people, to express your opinion again?
Mr. Armstrong, I felt we had expressed our opinion to the proper level, on the proper occasion of the meeting that had been set up for it. I felt I had done all I could do.
Thank you.
Did it surprise you that that NASA picked up the count?
I was disappointed they did, yes.
Have you had any discussions since that time with NASA people about it?
Only one, sir, was Mr. Aldrich gave me a call reflecting on what time, had I made a later phone call, I believe was the question he had to me, and the answer was no. After the input I made through my program managers at that meeting, I made no further calls. That was the question he had posed to me.
I see. Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Patron, I believe that's all. Mr. Aldridge? I might say that we had a somewhat different